Hello and welcome. My name is Leanne Ta, your host for today, broadcasting live from the Industrie 4.0 Maturity Center. We would like to warmly welcome you to our today's webcast session, Challenges and Solutions to Transform Producing Companies. But a few remarks before we start. For replay purposes, our today's session will be recorded and you will be able to get access to the video link in the following days. Furthermore, we encourage you to ask questions during our webcast by simply clicking on the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. All questions will be answered throughout today's session. If we cannot answer all questions in this webcast, you will receive the answer afterwards in the near future. So without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome our today's speakers, Jameel Istaitih and Sebastian Schmitz. Jameel is the Director of Industrie 4.0 at the Strauss Group, an Israeli food company with global representative. He's responsible for formulating Industrie 4.0 strategies and developing assimilation processes in several organizational units. My co-worker Sebastian Schmitz works as a senior manager industrial practice at the Industrie 4.0 Maturity Center. Over the last years, he collected numerous experiences in transforming producing companies in various industries. So my first question goes out to Jameel. As most of our participants might not be familiar with the fast-moving consumer goods industry, could you thus please introduce Strauss to us briefly?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the intro. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to take part in this interesting webcast. So if we talk about Strauss Group, you want to share some slides or talk directly? So Strauss Group is actually a food and beverage company headquartered in Israel. We are active in more than 16 countries, as you see now on the slide. Our home base is in Israel, where I'm sitting. The headquarters is located in Tel Aviv's area. And we are dealing in several fields like coffee, water, and what we call fresh and dips and spreads, what we may be more familiar as hummus, and more. Our turnover is $2.5 billion, just to give you a feeling about the size. We have mainly 4 business units, as you see on the slide. We will go from the right to the left because the most interesting one for our discussion is the left one. So we have Strauss Water, where we produce POUs, like small mini bars to get filtered and purified tap water. We have the PepsiCo Strauss Dips and Spreads joint venture together with PepsiCo dealing with dips and spreads. Who of you which are located in Europe, maybe you are familiar with the Obela hummus, mainly in Netherlands and in Germany. And we have the Strauss Coffee activity worldwide. And the last but not least, it's Strauss Israel on the left, which is where we started all this activity, which a very wide portfolio and very much of joint ventures, as you see there, which we will discuss it later, how it affects our journey in the digital transformation.
Yes, and as I mentioned before, Jameel, you are responsible as the Director Industrie 4.0 at Strauss Group. What were the challenges when you first started your project journey there?
Yeah. Well, so as I've mentioned, Strauss Group is a player in the food and beverage sector. As you know, it's a very competitive and challenging. The corporate is working very hard to maintain and hopefully increase the growth rate, taking in consideration all aspects, including quality, food safety, worker safety, and regulations, of course. In 2018, it was very clear for us that in the new era, we will not be able to support the strategy like years before, and we need to think and act different. At that time, I was already in the CTO's office leading the innovation, but on a wide scope. So at the end of 2018, I was assigned to lead the Industry 4.0 strategy of the Strauss Group with the initial focus at Strauss Israel. In 2019, actually our first year in this journey, because we just kicked off at the end of 2018, we started our activity with focusing on 6 main areas. One of the main areas was mapping and assessing, of course, also learning and training, smart technical investments, POCs, projects, and so on. It was good as a beginning, but very fast we realized that for the next year, we need something more solid a type of a methodology with guidelines. And at that point, we started the communication with a 4.0 Maturity Center, as you've mentioned.
Thank you. So, Sebastian, are these challenges Jameel just elaborated on only concerning fast-moving consumer goods companies, like, for example, Strauss Group, or would you depict them as a general challenge across manufacturing industries?
Yes, those described challenges are very typical for many industries, not only in the food and beverage industry, but all over different industry sectors. What we see when we're coming at the first time to companies, we see that first pilots are already done, but in many cases those pilots are figured out as some kind of islands. So there is no integrated strategy behind this, and also the potential which was first calculated for those pilots wasn't become real. And we also see a second big problem when we are going to companies, that pilots are started in many cases with some new advanced technologies, but sometimes baseline technologies like an IT/OT integration are missed, and therefore those pilots can get successful finished in the end, and those project takes much longer and also cost much more money than first expected.
Jameel, you talked about the challenges of Strauss Group. How did you actually convince management eventually to take the maturity index as a method to overcome the challenges and hence manage the digital transformation of Strauss Group?
Okay. Well, if I summarize the first year, which is actually 2019, last year, we will see that we finished it with a lot of POCs spread over the plants, like what I call it, the islands of Industry 4.0. It was good for awareness, but it did not unfold the operative potential as we've planned originally. We had too many projects in the portfolio without assigning appropriate resources, which make it very hard to manage. So as you know, when time and money are limited, so the outcome also. Organizational structure and culture were not under focus. Mainly technical aspects were considered, which made it a very technical oriented and not a holistic approach. And as you know, also some managers ran after the buzzwords like the rest of the world without a deep consideration of basic infrastructure and data quality. And unfortunately, some of those projects did not succeed. So POCs and projects were executed, but not always in the right places and the right sequence. We realized that we need to stop and go back to the Industry 4.0 holistic approach, which emphasizes automated information flows that drive agility. And this is the main point that everyone needs to understand and focus at. After searching for the best practices and methodologies worldwide, we decided to adapt the Acatech Maturity Index, and that's where we started.
Before we move forward, I would like to kindly remind you to use the Q&A panel to ask questions if you have any. And yes, we are looking very forward to answer them. So we just learned that the Industry 4.0 Maturity Index was implemented as a standard for the digital transformation at Strauss. Sebastian, can you explain the method of the index and why this should potentially set as the standard?
Yes, for us, if we take a look how we interpret into Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 does bring you data-based decision and be able to be more agile on different situations. For sure, if we then talking about the digital transformation of companies, it's clear that we have to integrate machines, employees, assets, material, and also information systems. But if you want to be successful in the end, you have to take a holistic view on those. So it's also important that you are taking part of the organizational structure. So how do you work together between different plants, but also between different departments? And it's also important that you have a company culture that fits to the technical implementations.
And how is the Industry 4.0 Maturity Index applied at producing companies?
Yes, before I just want to go on this and explaining how we are using this for companies, let me also explain second principle, which is very important for the digital transformation, because the transformation parts in many companies look the same. One of the first aspects is that you have to computerize the processes, bring IT into those, and also connecting different IT systems which are at the moment available in different processes and different departments. As soon as those homeworks are done, you can start within the Industry 4.0 age. One of the first steps and also the first benefit within Industry 4.0 can be seen as soon as you reach visibility. At visibility, you have the main data available in real time and can use those for the first decisions. And it also enables you, if those data are available, that you can use those data, analyze those data, and also finding out what are root causes behind different events. So you are learning from situation that occurs day by day at your company. And if you know those patterns, and if you collected knowledge about situation that occurs in your company, you can move forward, go to the stage what we are calling predictability. So forecasting different situations to the future. As soon as this happens, you can also do some of your decision autonomously. And now it's important, if we take a look on a typical transformation path of a company, and also on the other side of those 4 areas which are important for a digital transformation, we are combining those and having one model where you can access your maturity level through those 4 areas and finding out where do you have strengths and weaknesses. So far, this for the theory about the Industry 4.0 Maturity Index. And now what's the question, how is this Maturity Index used within producing companies? For sure, if we take a look on companies, and I think Strauss, as a multinational company which has plants and also sales worldwide, this is a very typical example. For sure, you cannot start with a complete company, and you have to set first a scope, defining where do you want to start, probably which plant or which processes are including in this scope. As soon as you have done this initial phase, you can start with the project. One of our first starting points there is to do a kick-off together with the management of the company, or probably of those people who are responsible for the scope we said before. Because for us, it's important that Industry 4.0 follows targets which are also relevant for the company and the scope itself. Then we are doing the status quo analysis. So measuring with the tool which I just explained, how good are you within your different processes, and finding out where are strengths and weaknesses. To standardize this, we have in the background a very huge questionnaire which can be asked to the responsible people in interviews, and then having a very detailed picture, where are you right now, how good are you in your technical parts, and also how good are you in your social parts, and does this fit together. And if we have this deep understanding about the status quo and also know the targets from the first step, then we can derive a roadmap, so showing which projects should be implemented, what is the right sequence, are those projects that are more related to technical aspects or social aspects, and also how much are those projects aligned to the targets that you can follow your own strategy on your transformation path.
But how do you actually decide on which plant you conduct the status quo analysis? How did Strauss Group choose the right plant, Jameel?
Well, sorry. I believe that digital transformation is about people, mainly about people and digital leadership. So the first place to start at is related to management team and the buy-in level you receive there in the preparation discussions. So we've done several preparation discussions in those different factories that we have in Israel, and we've chosen the first one to start. Of course, you need to keep in mind to pick a site that the impact would be valuable and scalable. Otherwise, we can make a nice roadmap, and at the end, it would not be scalable and the impact would not be visible.
And how is the on-site phase designed at your manufacturing site after you decided where you want to conduct the status quo analysis?
We chose to be proactive in this case and support the Industrie 4.0 Maturity Center team. We asked what are the possibilities, and we decided to start with an expert training as the center offers. So we picked 4 members from our management team and went through this training. From there, we went through an assessment of 3 days according to the standard plan, starting with a short workshop with the management team to align the vision and focuses. After that, we went through a pre-scheduled agenda interviewing key functions from the plant and other from the headquarters supporting the processes that we have in those specific plants. At the end of the 3rd day, we get the status quo chart with the scores. From there, the team left us for about 1.5 weeks processing the data that they have collected from this assessment procedure. Of course, we were supporting them, and we've done several remote meetings to discuss the results and to develop them together with them. That was the value of having this expert training, because we were also proactive in the whole process. And after about 1.5 weeks, the team came back to Israel and presented the full results, the full report, and of course the roadmap and the next steps that we can adapt.
And what additional results can customers expect from the status quo analysis?
So at the end, customer can expect 2 types of results. As Jameel told already, one of the first results is for sure the status quo analysis. The customer get a deep analysis, where are they right now regarding to our 6 maturity levels, which I explained before. With this overall view, you first can see where are your strengths and also where are your weaknesses. So how good are you on technical aspects like integration of machines or also integration of information system, and also how good does this fit to the organizational structure and also to the culture of the company. But by the interviews with all the process responsibilities, you also have a very detailed picture. How good are your different processes, where are strengths, where are weaknesses, and also giving a very detailed analysis. And then, for sure, there's also the second type of result we are presenting. This is the roadmap, also Jameel mentioned before. Between the status quo analysis and the roadmap is normally about 1 or 2 weeks, where we're collecting all the results, finding out where are gaps, and then deriving the roadmap. For the roadmap, as you could see before on the slides I showed, you have an overview which sequence you should follow to do your digital transformation in a successful way. For sure, we are also providing much more material description of all of those projects that you're also able to start with implementing and doing the first project right after we are doing our presentation.
So do you always start with the status quo analysis? In other words, why is it sufficient analysis important to manage the digital transformation?
Yes, we are following our approach that those 4, what we are calling structuring forces, have to be balanced. I want to give you one example why it is very important that those 4 areas are balanced. You can have the best and newest IT system in the world. also with a good integration to the machines. But if your employees are not trained and they do not how really to use the IT system, or in some bad examples, they are also building some workarounds through that IT system, then the whole technology, this system, will not bring you any value. And we want to avoid a situation like this, or also in other cases that are some baseline technologies, like an IT-OT integration, which I mentioned before, is missing, and that you see this gap only after you started with the implementation. So therefore it's important that we're doing a very deep status quo analysis before, see where are weaknesses and also where are some existing gaps. And our first task is to close those gaps, to bring all four structuring forces to one maturity level, and afterwards you can improve your maturity step by step.
As Sebastian just talked about the expected results, I'm wondering what were the results of the Strauss Group after the first step, so after the status quo analysis. What were your impressions about the results, Jameel?
So it was a very impressive procedure that we've tried the first time. It was very hard to realize and believe that in 3 days of assessment, 2 external experts are able to interview and see all those processes, gaps and opportunities and plot them on a very practical format of a report. You need to understand that when I'm saying an interview, it's not a classical interview that someone is asking and answering. Although in the background, I'm as an expert, someone who went the expert training, know the format of the questionnaire that we have in the background. The team did not went through this format asking and answering. It was more like a free flow conversation, which made it very fluid. So it was, from my end, very interesting to see, and we got the results. And I have to admit that we were skeptic at the beginning, but we decided to give it a try, and I'm glad that we've done that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we completed step 1 and are hopefully pretty impressed by the outcome of the status quo analysis. So what comes next?
What comes next? So as soon as the status quo analysis is done, we are normally leaving the company for about 1 or 2 weeks and start to working on the roadmap. As mentioned before, in the status quo you see a lot of gaps, you see some weaknesses within the processes. And our first goal is to close those gaps, finding solutions, which technology is capable enough to close those weaknesses, and also how can the process and the efficiency of those processes be better than now. And all those details we are getting by the interviews, as Jameel just told, we are putting them together in a roadmap. For sure, if you just look for ideas, if you just want to know which aspects can improve the different processes, you will get very fast a long list. But it's also important that we are giving them a sequence, ordering those projects and telling them what would be the starting point. If you take a look on typical roadmaps, you see that the projects there are aligned to the targets a company have, so therefore the company is very individual. And also the roadmap exists not only of technical project and technical aspects, but also on cultural and organizational parts that have to be changed before moving on with the transformation.
And how can this roadmap be beneficial for Strauss?
Well, in fact, we are running Industry 4.0 projects before we had this roadmap. So as a first step, we are spreading the running projects and activities over this roadmap. Then we analyze the scope and the sequence to make sure we are running according to the roadmap, because not always we found that the projects that we're managing are appropriate in the appropriate sequence and in the most optimized way. And from there, we modify our plans accordingly. The most impressive discussions were really around the organizational structure and culture, where we did not much focus at the beginning, and Sebastian has just explained that, and I also see it in other organizations in Israel and worldwide that this is not in their focus too. So it's a good point.
As COVID is an omnipresent controversy these days, challenging our current daily lives at the moment, how is COVID actually handicapping initiatives in terms of project implementation?
Everyone in the world was affected and still affected on COVID-19. So in our side, it did not stop the activities. It just delayed it slightly because we had to support some critical and urgent issues in the operations, as most of the organizations. But we returned back very quick, and we stick to the original plan. But we had to continue the second and third plans remotely using some web platforms because, you know, all the flights were canceled. But eventually, I'm also very glad that we've done that, and the results were the same like being on site. Of course, we had to work a little bit harder to accomplish that, because still we need to have some virtual tours, but I think we accomplished that in a very well manner.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just seeing that we have received a lot of questions, so we will take a question break here now, and we would like to answer some of your stated questions. So the first one would be, does the maturity index address the sustainability factor in when it comes to implementation of Industry 4.0 roadmaps?
Yeah, if you're talking about sustainability, for sure, it's a very important factor and also a goal many companies are struggling to. For sure, if this is in the focus of the company, this is taken as a target in the kickoff. And then if you're talking later about the roadmap itself, we take a look, okay, how can we force projects that also go in the direction of increasing the sustainability of the existing plants or the existing companies.
Thank you very much. I hope this answers your question. The next one is, what is your experience in setting upfront value metric for pilot and innovation activity?
Yes, I think the value and the benefit you're getting out of a project is very important. At the first stage, we're getting a roadmap that is able to ordering the project for the next 3 to 5 years. And before starting with implementing the first project, you want to know, okay, what is the benefit? What is the value if I want to start with a project? What we therefore do is a tool called the value quantifier. So we are measuring in deep for the first projects which potential does such a project has. So how much money could be saved, or how much money does existing problems cost you? And on the other side, we also make an estimation about how much do you have to spend for technologies or also for implementing the project. So then you can calculate an ROI for the project and also define the investment you have to do.
Talking about return on investment, there's another question about this. How do you justify the return on investment objectively transitioning from pilot phase to plant-wide implementation of activities?
Yes, in the first stage, it's you have to set up a pilot somewhere. You have to take a look on the plant. Probably you did the analysis right now, but every time keeping in mind that this pilot, this project you're doing right now, should not only be focused on that plant, but if it's also responsible to other plants that you make and roll out, and also preparing in the implementation phase already for a global rollout. If you're doing then the ROI calculation, it's also important to keep this in mind. Trying to figure out what does it mean for the plant, for the case you are just working in, and then also talking what will happen if you do a rollout, take the pilot to other plants in your company, because technology investment can be much cheaper if you directly put it to other plants.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
May I elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Yes.
Yes,
So
sure.
if I look at our side at Strauss, when we've done some POCs or pilots on some technologies, we've done those locally on one site, but we could not understand the size of and the value and impact of the scalability before having those assessments and the rest of the factories, because we did not understand really the gaps that we have in each of those factories. So this POC could be fitting one plant, it could be two plants, it could be three plants, and in plant number 2 it could bring value X, and plant number Y it could be double X. So only after you do those assessments in a very systematic way and you have the clear vision of all the gaps in each of those plants, you are able to do those calculations, because in order to be able to do clear calculations, and even if they are some estimations, you need more data. And I think this process makes it very useful to give you more data and insights in order to do the calculations. I hope it made it a little bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe a last question in this question break for Jameel. What is Strauss now planning on how to continue? Is the roadmap detailed enough to directly follow up with the implementation measures?
Yeah, we have nowadays 3 assessments that we have done in 3 different plants. Let's say it's about 50% if I compare also the size of those plants. They are 50% of Strauss Israel. From there, we are running to build a master plan synchronizing all activities. It's a very good question. I would love to answer it, but maybe we can discuss it offline with that person. So you feel free to contact me via LinkedIn, and I can talk to you freely and give you more information. But yes, we are using those assessments at a site level, and we are now building a headquarter assessment in order to build up a master plan for all of our operations, synchronizing all resources and efforts in a good manner.
All right, thank you. So with the last answer, I would like to conclude this question break. And thank you very much for all your questions. We actually have a lot more to answer, but at the end you get another question break, so we will elaborate on that further. So as we now have learned that Strauss analyzed a manufacturing site, as you already said, are there additional sites which were analyzed, and particularly why?
So as you've seen in the first slide I presented Strauss Israel. Strauss Israel portfolio is very diverse, and some sites were acquired or running as a JV. So we have JVs with Danone, PepsiCo, and some kibbutzes in Israel. And we understand that there are a lot of differences, and we want to drill down and hold the status quo for different plants. Because if we have 8 plants in Israel and we are just doing it for one plant, it will not present the whole view, and we felt it is a missing point, and that's the reason we decided to continue with more facilities.
So far, we mainly talked about the shop floor, but how can the method be implemented for the whole corporation comprehensively?
Yes. So for sure, it's always the first step to take a look at one plant. And the situation Jameel just described, that plants are very different, this is a situation we see in many other companies. So therefore, on the one side, it's important to get an overall picture to understand what is the status quo for your different plants. And then you have to decide on which level you want to work on those projects. Because some of those projects could be having a positive impact for all plants, and therefore this should be a corporate activity. For example, implementation of IT system is in many cases an activity that should be forced by the corporate, and also the corporate should develop some kind of an organization, bringing out an Industrie 4.0 organization, also have the connection to the plants, that the whole transformation can be controlled and managed by the corporate. And it could be also on other activities that the implementation of those is mainly done by the plants, because this solves only local potentials, and in every activity, as better as your picture is right now, you get a better overview about your company, and you can better decide on which level you want to do the implementation.
As we are nearly approaching the end of our today's webcast, in order to sum it up, why was the maturity index important for the Strauss Group, Jameel?
Well, I will try to answer the previous question of the person who asked it and combine it all together. Hopefully it will answer his question. As I've mentioned, Strauss Israel has various business units and few headquarter units supporting all. And we are now in a timing that we are building a master plan for the operations that will support different plants in the right disciplines and sequence using same available resources in a synchronized way. And this is the main point that you need to keep in mind, especially if you have more than one plant and you have a headquarter unit supporting them, because they are not synchronized in a most appropriate way all the time. So in this case, you need to do an organized assessment, and you must have a tool or methodology to guide you, and this is what we have done, and this is what I recommend. Just to mention, later this year we will try to build up an IT strategy for the operations, including CapEx investments plans for 2021 based on these processes. The reason we want to do it is that in the last years, the IT strategy was, let's say, mainly top-down. And this year, eventually, when we have this deep drill into our operations using this methodology, we are doing it bottom-up, which makes it much more valuable and can fit more our operations plans and the digital transformation in the production floor. I hope it answers the question in a well manner.
Thank you. And an additional concluding question to Sebastian. So after analyzing a manufacturing side, collecting gaps on plant level, offering solutions on corporate level, and engaging in an expert training, what would be typical next steps?
Yes, what would be typical next steps? On the one side, it's important to keep the momentum which you just started with doing the analysis. So therefore, it's important to do some projects that can be finished on a short term. We call this some digital lighthouses, like dashboards showing the OEE or probably some logistic KPIs. On the other side, we also see that in many companies, the IT landscape is a very huge problem at the moment, and that there should be activities in make more integration between the systems. For sure, you also have to think about how to integrate those IT systems together, and we also know that this is a long-term project. But as sooner as you started those projects, sooner you will finish those. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's very important to have in parallel some projects that can be finished before, and where you also see some benefits before, and also keep your whole transformation running by this.
All right, thank you. So we actually are at the end of our webcast now, but we're ahead of time, so we have some time to discuss the questions which are unanswered. And I would just like to start to not miss any time. So could you please discuss Industrie 4.0 and quality aspects? I mean, quality 4.0, and what kind of parameters do you consider for quality 4.0?
Yes, with the technology Industrie 4.0 is including, you also are having more data available. And if you're now talking about quality, there are two aspects how quality data can be generated. The one is for sure if you have an own quality process, like in labs, for sure you can measuring as you did it before. But on the other side, it's also important to use the existing production data, analyze those data, combine those data also together with the quality that you are prepared in a very early stage if quality could be some problems or that some parameters are running out of scope. Therefore, to increase the quality of products and your production, Industrie 4.0 can really make a big step to your company.
Thank you. Now a question for Jameel. The person stated, I heard Jameel saying that organizational structures and culture were an eye-opener in the assessment. How did Strauss tackle the responsibilities of the cyber-physical systems between IT and OT? What are the mechanisms in place to make collaboration work?
Wow. Great question, and a very hard one, and even if we have 18 minutes, I will not be able to answer it in a good manner because it's a long story. But definitely it's a very, I may say it as a painful point, and I will try to explain at least. The IT in our organization is part of the corporate, as a corporate body. So the IT is supporting Strauss Israel, but also supporting the rest of the business units globally. So I get a piece of focus. This is the first point. Second, the IT OT activities are part of the IT, and I'm not managing them directly at this moment. We are doing a lot of collaborations, but their annual plans are not very well synchronized with our activities, and the resources are also limited. So we are actually tackling those aspects in those moments, and this is exactly when I've mentioned earlier the IT strategy of the operations. It's exactly the way that we are going to touch that, because if last year I've received the support of the IT OT guys for X hours because this is what they thought, this year we are going to say, okay, according to the gaps, according to the challenges, according to the mass of projects that we are going to run, we need Y hours from your end, and this is how the plan will look like, and please adapt your resources accordingly, and if we need to discuss it with the CEO, let's do it right now. So before we started the 2 years activity of Industry 4.0 in Strauss, the IT was a separate body from the operations. And I can say that till now, we don't have much footprint or enough footprint of IT teams within our operations, but we are working on that in those days.
And this is a very typical situation we see at many of our customers, that if you take a look on the organization, you also have to think about, okay, how to set up the organization and also those support function in a new way if you now want to start your digital transformation in a successful way.
All right, thank you. Another question, which might go out to both of you, Jameel as well as Sebastian. Can you give an example on which initiatives come out of the study related to the organizational aspects?
Okay, you want to start, Sebastian? I start.
Yes, typical projects that are coming out on the organizational structure on the one side is to have somebody responsible for Industry 4.0 in all plants. take somebody who's taking the role as a local Industry 4.0 manager. The other is also how to share data between different departments at a plant, also between plants, so how can a collaboration between different plants can look like, and on the other side, also how to include suppliers and customer, that data, ideas can be shared, and that you take a look how to increase the whole supply chain.
I can give another example which we found it very critical at this stage. We found that we miss a function like a PMO in each of those plants, because nowadays we have IT guys running projects in each of those plants. We have operational excellence teams that were running, quality teams from the headquarters that are running additional projects, the 4.0 project team, and so on and so on. And we don't have a function who is actually managing as a PMO all those activities and synchronizing them, because we found that in another plant we could find a situation that the same project is running on another site, but the two sites were not synchronized. So we are putting efforts on two different sites, and then the timeline is extended dramatically. Instead of putting the efforts on one site and finish the projects and start seeing the value faster. So we decided that we need to have a PMO who will see all those activities related to all those cross-functional teams, which were dramatically raised in the last 3-4 years, and we are going to adapt that. And in addition, I can give another example. All our technical engineering and maintenance teams, we are starting now to talk about organizational structure and culture. And I can tell you honestly, for me, it was very hard to put HR guys into our, let's say, scheduled meetings, because Industry 4.0 was like a only technical issue and not related to the HR at all. And after we've done this assessment and we have received the wide buy-in from plant managers and the CEOs of the various business units, the HR teams became a part of our activities. So I think that we can mention additional examples. Some of them I can't mention because they are confident, but others I can mention later if someone is more interested.
All right, thank you. A last question, which was stated several times. Do you help to choose partners for your clients? Do you have a coaching program throughout the transformation trip? Maybe Jameel can elaborate on the project experience with the Industrie 4.0 Maturity Center as well.
I'm not sure I understand the question. If the Maturity Center is supporting us to connect some vendors, for example?
Yes.
I'm sure this is a question.
Right.
We have not reached that point at this stage. We are now working on the roadmaps, and let's say most of our vendors we are familiar with. I think from my end, it's not a pain point, because technologies and vendors we have, I don't want to say endless, but we have a lot. The problem is where to put them and when to put them to work on a pain point. We have a few points that we've discussed with the Maturity Center, like a study around the MES, Sebastian, as we've discussed, to check some possibilities, and the Maturity Center connected us to some vendors in their campus in Aachen, but not much at this stage. I'm sure that when I get to that point and I need more vendors, they will be more than happy to support us in that.
Yes, let me just summarize those. So on the one side, if you take a look on education program itself, we have different education programs in our portfolio. So as expert training, Jameel told in the beginning of our talk also, so which enables customer to use our maturity index by himself. And also we are having different education programs that helps to manage the transformation, give an overview also to the C-level, and really deep dives if you are responsible for the transformation by yourself. And also the other aspects of the question, Leanne, you told, for sure we're having a very bright partner network. So if there are some technical solutions or also solutions in the social aspects are required, we can advise some of our partners to fulfill this project.
All right, and with that answer, we are already at the end of our today's webcast, Challenges and Solutions to Transform Producing Companies. We invite you to get in touch with our today's experts for further questions via email or LinkedIn. And for further information, particularly about the Maturity Index and its application, please visit our website. We are looking forward to see you at our next webinar on July 7th with the topic, What Transformation Leaders Do Differently. So Jameel and Sebastian, thank you very much. And likewise, thank you to all of our dear participants and your participation in asking questions. So see you in 2 weeks. Have a nice remaining week from wherever you're listening, and goodbye.